Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the webinar. This is a comprehensive guide to ANSI ISEA Z358.1-2014 and emergency shower and eyewash compliance. Welcome. We really greatly appreciate you being here. We're going to impart a lot of knowledge today with a lot of great follow-up items for you, and we'll dive right into it. First off, quick disclaimer. So this is just for educational purposes. The presentation is not meant to be distributed widely, rather to be used for educational purposes. During the webinar, please feel free and we encourage you to ask questions at any time. My partner Hayden, who I'll introduce here in a second, is on the back end. He's going to answer some of the more simple questions, quick and easy ones. Some of the more complicated questions, if you have them, we'll save them towards the end of the webinar, and I'll answer them myself after we've gone through the ANSI standard and given you a couple tools for maintaining compliance in your facilities. So just use the control panel, submit those questions. Any unanswered questions will be followed up in via a follow-up document spreadsheet with all the questions, all the answers in the follow-up materials. Now the webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on demand. It'll be posted to our YouTube site. We'll send it in the email, the link. All of that will happen about 24 to 48 hours after the presentation is done. We have a small amount of poll questions we're going to launch during the webinar because we'd like to get your feedback. Helps us to improve this product and the ways that we interact with you and the ways that we become a better company for you to interact with, and gives us more ways to be helpful to you. So your participation is greatly appreciated in those questions, and we thank you ahead of time. Now, a follow-up survey will also be sent out after the webinar, and I'll get you a $5 Starbucks gift card for your participation in that as well. So ahead of time, thank you. I appreciate it. That's my mug up at the top. My name is Justin Dunn. I am the Senior Field Marketing Specialist with Haas. I will be your guide in the very useful, sometimes confusing ANSI Z358.1 standard. Running everything in the background is Hayden. He's going to be covering our poll questions and a couple things at the end of the webinar too. Hayden, you want to say hi real quick?
Hey everyone, looking forward to today. It should be a great ANSI webinar, as always, hosted by Justin Dunn.
And then popping in and out of the webinar and responsible for our paychecks, Nicole Dennison, our marketing manager, is she's in the background listening, I think, but she is responsible for helping to organize this and giving Hayden and I the tools to help present this information to you. So thank you, Nicole. Our topics today are going to include what is the ANSI ISEA Z358.1 standard, the significant requirements of the standard, and how to test for those pieces of emergency equipment, best practices for emergency equipment, some additional sources for compliance tools that you can use and engage with us on, and we'll do a Q&A. Now, just to real quick touch on it, this is a certified webinar, CEU credits. We will give you all the information that you need to follow up with us after the webinar and the follow-up materials so that we can get you those CEU credits for your organization, or even just a certificate of attendance, but those instructions will be in the follow-up materials. With all that said, let's launch poll question number 1 real quick. Hayden, if you would, please.
Our first poll question today is your facility experiencing a shortage in maintenance staff? Simple question, just a yes or a no for the answers. Also, I would like to remind everyone, if you do have questions, please feel free to submit them. We will answer as many questions as we can during the chat, And then Justin will also be answering a few at the end. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up now. Thank you, everyone, for your responses.
All right, moving on. So step one, the importance of compliance. I'm sure probably all of you know who OSHA is, but just in case you're learning, you're educating yourself, and you're getting up to speed, OSHA is the Occupational Health Safety and Health Administration. They are the agency that's responsible for regulating emergency shower, Eyewash facilities, and for holding us all accountable and making sure that we are maintaining standards that are acceptable for our employees, right? Now, OSHA's standard, they have their own for emergency first aid, Eyewashes, and safety showers, but it's very brief. It's 29 CFR 1910.151C. Under medical services and first aid, it simply states where the eyes or body of any person may be exposed to injurious corrosive materials, suitable facilities for quick drenching or flushing of the eyes and body shall be provided within the work area for immediate emergency use. Now that's great, that's helpful, and it's something they can enforce, but it doesn't give us any guidance whatsoever on what we need to do to comply with this. So, and that's where the ANSI standard comes into play. That is the tool that allows us to comply with this, to ensure that our emergency equipment is working appropriately, it's installed appropriately, and etc. Now, the importance of all of this is hopefully obvious to most of you. It's injury and fatality prevention, lowering general workplace risk, and preventing lost time and money for the employer and for the employee, right? Because if you run into a situation where an employee is supposed to have a piece of emergency equipment that's going to work in a first aid emergency, they have a chemical spray hazard, they get exposed, they go to use this equipment and it doesn't work for whatever reason, and there are a lot of reasons it may not. Poor installation, too much water, too little water, we'll cover all of that. But litigation is likely to be something to follow that incident, right? Lawsuits, etc. And we want to be able to avoid all of that, and the cost to do that is pretty low. Now, OSHA has stepped up enforcement, particularly for employers who have a history of serious or repeated violations. On August 1st, 2016, OSHA fines increased for the first time since 1990. They'd stayed consistent and were not being increased due to inflation. And they increased that by 80%, and it's effective January 2nd, 2018. They will continue to increase by an additional 2% to account for inflation. Here's a couple numbers. There's a couple scary ones on there. These are fines across the US, OSHA fines, due to specific Eyewash and emergency shower compliance issues. Now, there's a couple big ones, but everything from an athletic club to a dairy facility, etc. But the violations are pretty much the same. Either you didn't provide equipment, or that equipment wasn't working for some reason. So for instance, that Bay Area Athletic Club, this was probably just a pool. They probably had a pool or something similar on site, and they did not provide an emergency Eyewash or shower station to protect their employees from the extreme pH chemicals. This was probably a repeat violation due to the large number that you see there, 195,000. But they vary pretty wildly depending on how serious it is and whether they've had to warn you before. Now, the standard was actually written by the ISEA. If you're not familiar with them, they're the International Safety Equipment Association. ANSI is basically the distributor of that standard. So ISEA wrote it, and then the standard itself defines emergency Eyewash and shower design, location, temperature requirements for proper functionality and usage. It's the most widely referenced standard in the world for eyewashes and safety showers. Now, OSHA references the ANSI standard during their inspections, right? Because their own doesn't give you a whole lot of guidance, and they test the showers based on the ANSI requirements. Now, during those site inspections, again, they'll use, in their violation reporting, they're referencing the ANSI standard and recommending that you use that standard for your own compliance. It's the primary source for compliance with their own standard. Now, it was first published in 1981. It's had several revisions since in 90, 98, 2004, 2009, and 2014. Now, some of those were more important than others. In 2009, we got a temperature range for water delivery finally. Before it just said tepid water, which is a pretty wide range to a lot of different people. Simultaneous use requirements, eyewash testing requirements. And then in 2014, a lot of the changes were geared towards manufacturers of equipment to make sure that we're being consistent. The equipment is including the design, manufacture, and installation of these equipment was all across the board pretty much the same. It also included installation location and some just adjusted measurements to narrow in a couple of the requirements. With that said, we'll launch poll question number 2, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation and go over the significant requirements.
We still have quite a few responses coming in. Thank you, everyone. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close up the poll. Thank you.
And that wraps up poll question number 2. So only a couple more. They're located towards the end of the webinar, and we'll get going on those. Thanks again for participating in those. It really helps out. Okay, significant requirements. And immediately after, I'll go over how to test for those requirements at your emergency equipment, whether it's the eyewash, eye face wash, the shower requirement, and etc. So the very first thing that we need to talk about is testing. Okay, now weekly testing versus annual testing. On a weekly basis, the equipment needs to, a couple things have to happen at all emergency equipment. Now, if it's a plumbed piece of emergency equipment, it has to be activated weekly. The activation has to ensure flow of water to the head or heads of the device, and the duration of the activation just needs to be long enough to clear out the dead weight. This is making sure that we're preventing growth in the pipes, things like Legionella and etc. from building up and growing in there and causing further harm or clogging of the equipment. So we have to clean it out on a regular basis. Now, on a weekly basis for portable equipment, activation is not required. All that you have to do is, if it's a self-contained piece of equipment, right, it's a tank, etc. If it's gravity fed, then you just need to open the tank, make sure there's enough water in there for a full 15 minutes. Most manufacturers include a line that you can check. Water has to be above that line and you're good to go. On pressurized equipment, I would still jiggle the tank around, make sure it's full of water, but you're checking the pressure gauge that's on the piece of equipment to ensure that it's fully pressurized. Manufacturer's requirements are always listed on the tank, and the instructions on how to fill it and what the PSI should be. Double check those, check the gauge, and you're totally good. Activation is not required for portable equipment because it's going to diminish the amount of water. It's going to create a maintenance ticket for you. And on a weekly basis, that would just be crazy. An annual inspection, however, is a full head-to-toe inspection of the piece of equipment. This is our checklist on the right. Very handy checklist. We'll provide it to you after the webinar and the follow-up materials. But every facet of the standard has to be tested for each piece of emergency equipment. It doesn't take as long as you might think it does, but I'll go over how that's done in the following materials. Now, one of the most useful tools that you could get your hands on would be something like this. This is the Haas 9011 test kit. And these are the basic tools that you're going to need to measure each piece of equipment against the ANSI standard and check for compliance. Now, you're going to need a tape measure. You're going to need an Eyewash gauge. Now, this is a specially designed gauge that was designed and given to us through the ANSI standard. We copied that, made our own, and what it does is help to measure average human anthropometrics, the spacing between your eyes, and make sure that the equipment is usable. You'll need a 5-gallon bucket with the 2-gallon water line mark. I'll explain that here in a little bit. You'll need a shower sock and pole because they don't call it a drench shower for nothing. If you activate that thing without a shower sock in place, you and anybody in the vicinity are getting wet for sure. You'll need a thermometer to check temperature and some form of ANSI Z358.1 checklist, the 2014. This version would be perfectly acceptable and would walk you through the whole process. Now, into the requirements. Number one, visual stuff. Needs to be accessible within 10 seconds or 55 feet. Now, 10 seconds was originally hard to measure because we're all built differently. We can all cover 10 seconds of space in a different amount of time, which is why they included the 55-foot measurement in the back end of the standard in the appendix. And it's much easier to measure against and check in your facility. So check for the proximity to the hazard. Wherever your hazard is located to the emergency equipment, you want to make sure that space does not extend beyond 55 feet. Now, the equipment also has to be located on the same level as the hazard. Now, if you have a first floor and second floor and there are hazards on both, you'll need equipment on the first and second floor. You cannot be transversing stairs, changing levels and things like that to get to a piece of equipment. It has to be on the same level, okay? And that's mostly because you're going to be impaired. Your eyes, if it was a spray hazard, are not going to be in the best shape. Discovering this piece of equipment is going to rely on your eyesight, which isn't going to be in the best shape. So we need to make sure that it's on the same level and you're not running into additional hazards and obstacles on your way to the equipment. It also has to be free of obstructions, so other items that can just be placed in the path between the emergency equipment and the hazard. So a couple examples over there on the right. You got a mop bucket, you have additional equipment, lots of stuff gets piled up in front of emergency first aid equipment like this because it's used so rarely. And we hope it's used rarely, right? You have to have this thing. We hope you never, ever have to use it. But if there are obstructions in place, it's going to be more difficult. It's going to cost you time before you can get to that piece of equipment and start using it. And time is incredibly valuable between getting exposed to something dangerous and getting it off of you. Seconds count immensely in this situation. And it's the difference between losing your eyesight, keeping your eyesight, the amount of damage that's done to your skin by a corrosive, and etc. It can cut down the amount of time in the hospital and things like that. So the faster the better, and no obstructions can be in place. So look out for hoses, piping, and other equipment that are sitting in place. Needs to be lit, well lit, and easily identifiable with highly visible signage. Most emergency equipment comes with high vis signage. So just make sure that's installed. If you don't have signage, you have to get something in place. For instance, this piece of equipment on the right here, there's no signage in place. it would be very difficult to, unless you already knew exactly where it was, to identify this piece of equipment. So check for signage and make sure that the area is lit appropriately so it can be tracked down. It also needs to deliver flushing fluid for a full 15 minutes, and that's the bare minimum. 15 minutes of running time. So run each piece of equipment that you have, and it only needs to be once a year, for a full 15 minutes. That can be difficult to do in some situations. There is some specialized equipment in there, but however it is that you manage it, even if it's just the supply line that's connected to the piece of equipment, ensure that it's capable of supplying 15 minutes of water, and to ensure that it's capable of doing so. Now, outlets or dust covers basically need to be, the outlets of the water need to be protected from airborne contaminants. This is referencing dust covers like you see on the right here. You just need to ensure that all the heads of the devices and any stored flushing fluid, like in portable type equipment, is fully covered. This is making sure that contaminants aren't getting introduced, the heads of the device aren't going to get clogged. I've seen some crazy examples of this. Some were caked over in dry concrete mix, and when we eventually turned it on, only so many of the little ports on the iFacewash head broke away, and it was barely usable. So make sure, I mean, it could be anything, plastic, dust, and etc. Make sure it's not collecting on the surface or in the heads. Now, the dust covers have to be self-removing. This is really important. You can't be fumbling around with these pieces of equipment. So upon activation, you need to ensure that the dust covers come off without any further assistance. Now, that could be like this, like you see in the example here, where you activate it, the dust cover pops up and you're good to go. Or it could be like a clamshell type of dust cover where it's like a stainless steel bowl over it. And when you push the paddle, it lifts the dust cover out of the way. Either way, you're totally fine. But you have to make sure that they're in place and that they're self-removing. If it takes an additional step, that is non-compliant. Okay, now that's my buddy McDean in the video. And I don't know if you can tell, but that is was pretty cold. The equipment needs to go from off to on in 1 second or less. And it needs to remain on without the use of the operator's hands, which is incredibly important. Now, there's a misconception out there that it's in one motion. And to be fair, there is 1 or 2 states currently that have additional requirements that require a single motion activation, but most equipment is built like that anyways. Now, it needs to go from off to on in 1 second or less. So upon activation, just make sure that the water is in fact activating at the heads of the device very quickly. And make sure that there are no self-closing valves in place. Okay, they are usually identified with a large spring that's on the valve that will slowly close it after activation. Now, the reason that this is an issue is because you cannot hold that equipment open while keeping your eyes open, your eyelids open with your fingers, removing clothing, and dealing with other emergencies that might arise, right? And washing your body. So it needs to remain on indefinitely until you close it manually, okay? So no self-closing valves, very important. Now, each piece of equipment has their own requirement for the amount of water it has to dispense. Eyewashes have to deliver 0.4 gallons per minute. Those are identified pretty easily because it's just 2 very simple streams of water, like you see on the left there. An iFacewash is more complicated. You have the 2 streams for the eyewash in the middle, but then a lot more openings for water that will rinse your forehead, cheeks, and mouth area. You know, these days, the likelihood that you're going to deal with some sort of chemical or splash hazard that's not going to splash or spray, that's just going to land perfectly on your eyes is crazy. So eyewashes are primarily just for dirt, dust, particulates, and things like that, not chemical hazards. Now, an iFacewash with all those different additional openings to cover that area has to provide a minimum of 3 gallons per minute, okay? Now it can provide over that, these are just minimums. Now the dread shower has to deliver a minimum of 20 gallons per minute, which is a lot of water. Okay, 20 gallons a minute is the bare minimum. Now, if it's used correctly, that 20 gallons per minute can be very effective at flushing your entire body. If it gets too excessive, there is equipment out there that doesn't use flow controls very well or flow controls at all, and it'll dump 30 to 40 gallons, whatever's plumbed to it, out of that shower head and create its own dangerous type of situation in that your skin's already compromised. If you're dealing with a corrosive, it can be just an incredibly uncomfortable and dangerous situation. So make sure that these GPM rates are controlled appropriately at the equipment. Just like you see here. So this is spinning the water. You get very small particulates out of there. It's limited to using flow controls down to just over 20 gallons per minute. And you have a soft, gentle flow from the eye face wash, ensuring victim comfort. Okay. Now the reason I bring that up is because the flow from the eye wash, eye face wash, and shower has to be at a controlled flow at a velocity that's low enough to be non-injurious to the user. Okay, there's a couple different ways that we test this, but you need to be a little bit subjective here too and think about, put your feet in the shoes of somebody who might be exposed to corrosive, hazardous, or dangerous chemicals and how it would feel to sit in this equipment. If you've never been in a piece of emergency equipment, a combo shower, eye wash shower, no matter what, it's going to be a pretty uncomfortable experience because it's going to be one of the worst times of your life. You've been exposed to something really nasty. We don't need to add insult to injury or make it more difficult to be inside of this equipment for a full 15 minutes. So we want a gentle, controlled flow. So just confirm this by ensuring that the flow rate from the shower, the eye wash, eye face wash, and the pattern requirements are met, and I'll show you how to do that. Now here's a couple examples. You have too much flow, what's considered to be injurious flow, something I like to call a brainwasher on the left, and then you have too little flow on the right. There's not enough water coming out of here to sustain this equipment's ability to provide first aid, right? Basically choose which eye you want to save. So too much water, not enough water, both serious issues. If flow controls are being used correctly, the one on the left, too much flow, can be controlled, right? It can be dialed back using those flow controls. If there's not enough water, there's just not enough water. You need to check your supply lines, make sure they're meeting the minimum size requirements from the manufacturer, make sure there's no clogs or buildup in the unit and things like that. So very dangerous situations. Make sure you're working to discover these. This is why testing is so important beforehand. So this isn't what somebody has to attempt to use. Now, the eye wash gauge, I mentioned it earlier. The requirement here is that the flushing fluid from the eye wash or eye face wash, since an eye face wash includes 2 streams for your eyes as well, needs to meet the areas between the interior and exterior of a gauge at some point less than 8 inches above the eye wash nozzle. So this is what the gauge looks like. You can quickly throw it in your pockets. It's a tiny little device, but it provides some pretty valuable information for us. And there's a couple ways we use this. Number 1, use a tape measure. Measure up above the head of the device and use the eye wash gauge at 8 inches. Slowly lower it to ensure that the streams of the eye wash are meeting the eye wash gauge. And I'll show you what that looks like. So from above, you have the gauge, you're measuring, and you can see the eye wash streams are perfectly meeting the centers of the eye wash gauge. This is ensuring that if somebody goes to use this, that both eyes are going to get rinsed appropriately. Okay. This is also measuring the amount of water that's coming out of the unit. Now, if there's enough water supplied so that this is working the way that the manufacturer intended and designed it to, this gauge will be met perfectly. Okay. And this is how we're making sure it's getting 0.4 GPM and it's getting above 3 GPM. Use the gauge, it meets the guidelines, perfectly compliant. Now the flow pattern has a separate measurement that we need to focus on too. And one of the ways that we make sure that it's not too low and it is not too high for somebody to use. Again, this 33 to 53 inches from the floor measurement that I'm about to cover is based on average human size, anthropometrics, right? And so use a tape measure, measure from the floor up to the very top of the flow pattern coming out of the head, okay? And what this is doing is, again, just making sure that it's not too tall and it's not too short. As you bend over, open your eyes, you're in a fairly comfortable position within that range, so that it's, because you're gonna have to stand there for 15 minutes and it's gonna be uncomfortable, but keeping it within this range is gonna make it easier to use and more accessible for a wide range of people, okay? Now in 2009, the previous standard required a 45-inch maximum height, but it was measured to the head of the device, which wasn't doing anybody any good. Measuring the head of the device isn't doing anything. We need, the most important thing to measure was the thing that you're using, you're interacting with, which was the flow pattern. So that top of that flow pattern has to be within that range. Now, the heads of the device have to be a minimum distance of 6 inches from a wall, or just, let's just say, obstruction in general. And the purpose of this is to make sure that your head isn't going to hit anything, or something isn't going to interact negatively with the flow pattern from the Eyewash or iFacewash heads, and obstruct it, okay? So those heads have to be a minimum of 6 inches away from any obstructions. Just use a tape measure, measure from the head of the device, 6 inches out, make sure they're free and clear. That one's super easy. Now the flow rate for the shower, you're gonna need that bucket, you're gonna need the, with the 2-gallon water line mark, you're gonna need the shower sock and pole, and you're gonna need the thermometer, because it's a good place to throw in the temperature check, which I'll cover a little bit later. But to test the shower flow, you need to place the thermometer in the bucket first, okay, so you get an accurate temperature reading later on. You need to place the shower sock around the shower head and the bottom of it into the bucket, just like you see here in the photo. Make sure that you're holding on tight. You know, 20 gallons isn't too bad, but when you get a 30 to 40 gallon per minute shower, it's pretty intense, and you don't want a surprise baptism, okay? So make sure that you're holding it firmly in place. Activate the shower for 6 seconds. Do your 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippis, okay? Activate it for 6 seconds. After that, check that the 2-gallon water level mark on the bucket is being met. Okay, this is the same process as like a nurse checking your pulse at the hospital. They don't count for a full 60 seconds. They just do the math. So 2 gallons and 6 seconds times 10, 20 gallons, 60 seconds. Okay, so we're just cutting the making sure that the test is manageable. Okay, so activate for 6 seconds. Check that 2-gallon water line on the bucket. If it's over it, perfectly compliant, you're getting over 20 gallons per minute. If it's under, you need to check the supply line, make sure it's 1 1/4 inch, bare minimum for a combo unit, 1/2 inch for an Eyewash or iFacewash, and make sure there are no obstructions and that the valves are fully open. Now the shower flow pattern also has to be measured. And again, I get that this is difficult to do in some situations. For example, a hospital hallway, lab, you know, somewhere that has sensitive instruments nearby, but this pattern has to be measured, and you can do it very quickly. This is most ideal if it's outdoors or somewhere near a drain. The way you perform this test is that you measure 20 inches wide and 60 inches above the floor. So measure up 60 inches, find out where that point is, and then measure across 20 inches. This is, again, measured on just average human body measurements, right? This is 20 inches is about shoulder width. We're making sure that if you stand underneath this flow pattern, it is going to cover your body entirely, okay? Now, the center of the flow pattern also has to be free of obstructions by 16 inches. So just make sure that entire flow pattern is free of obstructions, okay? If you need to double check, measure from the center of the flow pattern perfectly underneath the shower head, measure out 16 inches in diameter, and make sure that there are no obstructions in that space, okay? So just like you see in that photo, the gentleman is completely within that flow pattern. If he were to step into it, he would be completely flushed and rinsed off. While the flow pattern on the right is not getting enough water, the shower is starving, the eye face wash would probably not be working in this instance either. And we need to make sure, we need to double check the supply line and for obstructions in the supply line. But this would not properly flush your body. So here is another of my coworkers. This is Bill. He's a couple offices down. And the way that we measure that is, again, he measured up 60 inches, measured across 20 inches, make sure the flow pattern is at or exceeding that, and you're completely good to go. All you need is the tape measure there, and it's a very quick, easy test. Now the shower head itself, not so much the shower head, but the outlet of the water on the shower head, needs to be between 82 to 96 inches above the surface floor of the user, whatever you're standing on at the equipment. So just use the tape measure, measure up to that outlet of water for the shower head. This is making sure that if it's too low, the shower flow pattern may be too narrow and won't cover your body appropriately. And if the shower head's way too high, it's not going to flush you correctly in your body. The water is going to be too spread out, and you're not going to get the full benefit of that shower. So 82 to 96 inches above the surface that you're standing on. Now the pull rod has to meet a similar requirement, but it's just a maximum height. So the pull rod cannot exceed a maximum height of 69 inches from the floor. Just use the tape measure, measure up to the bottom of the handle, make sure it's no higher than that. And that's just making sure that the shorter among us are capable of reaching that pull rod. Now, if you're really tall, you can reach the pull rod at any height. It's perfectly fine. But if you are a shorter individual, then we need to make sure that that pull rod is completely accessible to you. It's easy to reach, and we're not putting it out of reach. You don't have to work any harder to activate the shower. Now, combination unit components need to be capable of operating simultaneously, meaning both are running at the same time with enough water so that they're usable. And they need to be positioned so that the components of both the shower and the eye wash or eye face wash are aligned and can be used simultaneously by the same user. The shower and eye wash are never meant to be separate pieces of equipment. I can't tell you how often I run into situations where the plumber, contractor, whoever installed the shower, on one side of the hallway and the eye wash on the other side of the hallway, thinking they were, oh, well, if you hurt your eyes, you can go this way. If you get your eyes or something on your skin, you can go this way. But they're intended to be used at the same time by the same person. Now to test, activate both the eye wash and shower head together and ensure that there is no starvation at the eye wash or shower. The water is going to take the path of least resistance, which is the shower, and upon doing so can incidentally, if there are no flow controls in place to redirect that water down to the eye wash or eye face wash, can starve the eye wash. And you're in a bad situation. You're deciding whether I want the shower running or do I want the eye wash running? Do I want to save my skin or do I want to save my eyes? So ensure that upon activation of the shower, there's no starvation at the eye wash or eye face wash, okay? Also, Just ensure that the shower is aligned with the Eyewash or iFace wash. They're perfectly aligned with each other so that if you were to stand underneath it, you can both simultaneously use the shower and the Eyewash. That one's easy. Shut-off valves, very a big issue when it comes to emergency equipment. If shut-off valves are installed in the supply line for that equipment for maintenance purposes, provisions have to be made to prevent unauthorized shut-off. We don't want employees or anybody else or maintenance forgetting to turn them back on. We don't want somebody just walking by and turning the water supply off, right? Somebody's going to get a nasty surprise when they go to use it, nothing comes out. So trace the supply line back as far as you can and ensure any shut-off valves are locked open. Okay, you can use a lotto device, many valves that have a built-in holes that align with the valve handle and the valve that allow you to lock it. And we need this locked open, okay? So that you have to use a key in order to perform maintenance and shut the valve off. Employees who may be exposed to hazardous materials need to be instructed on the location and proper use of emergency showers. This one's a piece of cake. We suggest testing your employees by just quickly quizzing them on the location of the nearest piece of emergency equipment. If they answer incorrectly, quickly educate them as to where it is and how to activate it. And that's it, right? Just make sure your employees know where to go and how to use it. Now, if you're doing something particularly dangerous in an area that you're unfamiliar with, you may want to familiarize yourself with where it is and how to activate it if you're not used to working in a particular area. Next, where the possibility of freezing conditions exist, the unit needs to be protected from freezing, or freeze protected equipment needs to be installed. So a couple examples over on the right, these are heat traced, which is one way to accomplish this. The heat trace is electrical and it provides heat on the pipes to prevent it from freezing. Obviously, if the pipes freeze, you go to activate the equipment, nothing's going to come out, right? You also very well might have damaged the valves and or the equipment that's in place from the freezing. So just check your local weather patterns for sub-freezing temperatures and or any process inside of your facility that may create freezing environments, right? So if you have a particular, any time during the year where you have a freezing time period, you need to make sure you have freeze protected equipment in place. Very important. Tepid flushing fluid. So equipment has to deliver tepid flushing fluid between 60 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. This is 60 degrees isn't warm by any means. It's not your morning shower, but it is important that we're inside of this range for a couple of reasons. One, this temperature range is unlikely to affect any chemicals that may react negatively with hot water on your body. It will encourage the user to tolerate and stay inside of the shower. If it's too cold or it's too hot, it may push them out of it. And there's a lot of different ways that we can accomplish this using things similar to the tools on the right here. You can mix hot and cold water if you have it available. We can utilize electricity or steam to instantaneously heat water and then mix it at that shower. The kind of golden temperature is 85 degrees Fahrenheit, which again isn't, it's not a day at the spa, but it is warm enough that it is going to be tolerable and it's going to do its job correctly. Anything above that 100 degrees gets a little more dangerous. So measure the temperature at the shower. I told you earlier, throw the thermometer in the bottom of the bucket. So as you test the shower, you're getting a reading for the temperature. For an Eyewash or iFace wash, if you have an electric, laser, or even a traditional thermometer, just throw it in the stream of the water and wait for the readout. That's how you measure the Eyewash or iFace wash. Now the water range, again, 60 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius for my buddies up north. Water that is too hot or too cold, again, is going to drive the user out of the equipment. We here at Haas have heard terrible stories of coworkers having to force people into the equipment to get this material off, or even first responders having to do so, because it's intolerable. I don't know if you've sat in 60-degree water before. It's pretty cold. Anything south of that is going to be, and we're getting to the point where, you know, you have additional medical concerns that may arise. So one of them being hypothermia, cold shock, possibly leading to cardiac arrest on top of what you're already dealing with, right? And it may discourage the user from removing your clothing, okay? And we don't want that. If it's too hot, more than 100 degrees, you could risk hyperthermia, heat stroke, confusion. The outer layer of your skin may already be compromised. This is your layer of insulation on your body. So to be in water that's too cold or too hot can really exacerbate the situation and cause hypo or hyperthermia. It may also scald your eyes or soft tissue at above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and skin burns at 120 degrees Fahrenheit after about 5 minutes. So we got to be careful. I think the hottest water I ever ran across was like 137 degrees, and it was in the basement of well, I won't say what type of facility it was. I don't want to call anybody out, but it was hot, incredibly hot, and there's no way anybody could use it. And may have a negative reaction to chemicals already on their body. Okay. Legionella bacteria also thrives between 95 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and which is unfortunately a range that overlaps with the ANSI standard. So remember, 85 degrees is about key. That's almost the perfect temperature, and one that we try to educate people to try to achieve. So be wary of that hot water lines, as you may get Legionella growth in there too. Supplemental equipment. So I have an array of equipment that I have found over the years on the bottom there. This type of equipment is your squeeze bottle. Now this is called supplemental equipment for a reason. Okay, now the requirement is that supplemental equipment needs to provide immediate flushing fluid to support plumbed and self-contained emergency eye wash and shower equipment, but shall not replace them. Okay, you have to ensure that there is a plumbed or self-contained equipment nearby that can supply 15 minutes of water. Otherwise, you cannot have this equipment in place. Okay, if you have squeeze bottles in place, it's usually the sign of like a really healthy safety culture, because they're supplementing plumbed equipment and they want you to have immediate flushing devices available to quickly treat yourself on your way to plumbed equipment. And then check expiration dates regularly and make sure they get replaced. A couple quick safety considerations are in the appendix. Personal wash units can be kept nearby to supply immediate flushing fluid, but are intended as supplemental flushing devices. It covers first aid practices, waste disposal, and personal protective equipment. The appendix is information only, really, but supplements a lot of the information that we got earlier on and that we already talked about. Okay. Appendix B is super helpful because it covers supply lines, water capacity, valve operation, alarm devices. Even though the ANSI standard doesn't specify that you have to have an alarm, it does in the appendix recommend that you have an alarm device so that if somebody is using the equipment, everybody nearby is notified. It covers placement of emergency equipment, delivered flushing fluid temperature, that's 60 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and weekly activation for plumbed emergency equipment and the reasons behind that. So the appendix covers a little bit of extra information at the end of the standard that just supplements all the information we already covered. And feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about any of those standards or the Appendix 2. One of the most important things is Appendix B, Section B5, and it just states that a single step into an enclosure, like you see on the right here, where the equipment can be accessed is not considered to be an obstruction, right? I said there was no change in level allowed earlier on in the webinar. You are allowed one single step if it's into an enclosure. This is really important because we can't make this equipment flush with the ground. You have to step into it, which is why this consideration is here. Next is a door. In B5, you can have a door, but it has to meet certain requirements. It has to be non-locking. The doors have to open in the direction of the emergency equipment. The hazard has to be non-corrosive, and they have to be push bar or panic bar operated. Super simple, but if it doesn't meet any of those, you cannot have a door. Okay, poll question number 3. Hayden, if you would launch that, please.
Our third poll question today is, what are you likely to do after today's webinar? For this question, please check all that apply and do not answer if the question does not apply to you. The responses for this are: do a full test using the ANSI checklist Haas provides, contact Haas for more information on ANSI, educate others, order product to become compliant, and specify the right type of equipment. Thank you everyone for your responses today as well. They provide us a lot of help in figuring out what exactly our viewers and attendees are looking for and what their needs are. Still have a few responses coming in. I'll give everybody a few more seconds. All right, thank you everyone.
All right, couple quick best practices. Number 1, remove your contacts. Don't rub your eyes. The contacts can trap contaminants against your eyeball. You have to disrobe completely, including socks and shoes. You got to be in your birthday suit when you get into a piece of emergency equipment. You don't want chemicals and other corrosives being trapped against your body in the clothing and not being rinsed off appropriately. Some pieces of equipment, we offer first aid kits that have robes in them and sandals. Even our, like you see the curtain there on the right, the 2 pockets that you see there, one of them has a robe in it typically. Okay. Provide privacy curtains. All right. It's not going to be the best day of your life, but we don't need to add insult to injury. And you can have a little bit of privacy while you experience your emergency. Do a bump test before high-risk tasks. If you're doing something particularly dangerous, just make sure the equipment's working correctly before doing it. Be cautious while, all of them at once. I gotta fix that. Now be cautious while assisting others not to contaminate yourself. Do not touch or grab your coworkers. Scream and yell if you have to. Give them verbal instructions on how to get to the emergency equipment if they can't find it themselves. But if you touch them, you're gonna make the situation much worse. Ensure the correct type of signage is in place. If it's an Eyewash and shower, make sure there's not just an Eyewash sign. Make sure the sign is correct for the type of equipment so you know what to expect when you get there. Be cautious of proximity to electrical hazards. I don't know how many times I see these things installed next to outlets and crazy stuff like that. That is a big no-no. And then locate other first aid equipment nearby so it's easily and immediately accessible. ANSI Z358.1-2017 color coding for emergency hazards, and red danger stop, yellow caution, orange warning, green safety equipment, location of safety equipment, and the particular color of a manufacturer's equipment whose attendees are or who are on this webinar right now. So make sure that your equipment is colored correctly. Blue is for policies, and then purple, gray, black are definable by user. You can use them as needed, but a little bit of a bragging point there. Make sure you're using the correct equipment for the hazard. Eyewashes for airborne particulates, eye face washes for minor incidents just involving the eyes and face, low pH chemicals, something that's not going to do be corrosive to the skin. Drench showers for PPE decontamination, and combination units are the all-around piece of equipment, right? Chemical exposure, eyes, face, and body. And then onto a survey program. So Hayden's going to touch on a couple quick things, and then we have our 2 poll questions, and I'm just going to do questions at the end here. And go ahead, Hayden.
Thank you, Justin. So from our earlier poll question, I could see that many of you are struggling with staffing shortages. So I'm going to just touch on 2 of our programs that we offer that can help with this situation. The first is the ANSI Emergency Shower and Eyewash Survey program that you see here. For this program, we have representatives across the US and Canada who are qualified and trained in the ANSI standard, as well as how to test for the ANSI standard and all of its requirements. This survey program offers insight into your own facility's compliance by offering a free full-day inspection, which is going to include an inspection report. That's a basic download of every piece of emergency equipment that was tested at your facility, as well as how well it measures up against the ANSI standard. It also includes an executive summary chart. That's the chart that you see here on the slide, and that shows a breakdown of the compliant versus non-compliant products. And then finally, it includes a debriefing meeting where we will discuss the findings that we have and any recommendations for fixes with you. There are some restrictions that apply to this. They mainly include distance to your facility or how many days we would realistically need to be on your site. And you can visit our website using the link below to fill out the survey form. And filling out that form will get you directly in contact with Justin and myself, and then we can have a discussion on how best to move forward. Our 4th poll question is, would you be interested in a free site survey for your existing emergency equipment for ANSI compliance? So this free site survey is exactly what we just covered. It includes those reports and the debriefing meeting and all the things that we talked about in that previous slide. All right, we'll go ahead and close this poll question up. The next program that we offer to help with the staffing shortages is HOS services. When it comes to the ANSI standard, we often find that the issue is not knowing how to test for the ANSI standard, which can lead to fines for non-compliance or even injury of an employee, among many other options. HOS services is a program that we have set up to help you achieve ANSI compliance in any environment and remove those potential pain points you may have, and even pain points you may not be aware of. And we provide this service regardless of what brand you currently have at your facility. This service differentiates us from the rest of the market because we're the only manufacturer that provides a warranty and a field service for emergency shower and eye wash products like this. You'll see a quick list here of what is exactly provided with HOS services. It's that insurance that your equipment will be tested weekly and annually, preventative maintenance and contract, repairs and upgrades, startup and commissioning, online competent person training and certification, and a warranty service. Overall, HOS services is a great way to help us ensure that we're complementing those superior products we provide you with the best possible service we can provide you with year round. Launch our 5th poll question here, the final poll question of the day. Would you be interested in learning more about how HOS services can help you achieve ANSI compliance?
I would definitely encourage everybody to get a little bit of information on that. HOS services is expanding. It's a turnkey operation now. It includes annuals, commissioning, maintenance, weekly, monthly checks. I mean, they really do it all. It's a pretty amazing service. If you have the need and want to learn more, please hit yes, and we'll get you some more information.
All right, we'll close this poll question up. Again, thank you all for your responses today.
Okay, and then so before we close, there's some questions that I'd really like to answer for everybody. These were pre-submitted questions, so I'm just going to rapid fire get right through these. So Donald asked, what is the criteria for inspection and maintenance of portable eyewash stations? I hope I answered for that for you earlier on. But for portable eyewash stations, it's pretty much a visual check, right? You're just making sure that there's 15 minutes of water, whether it's a pressurized or like air pressurized tank or a gravity fed piece of equipment. You just have to make sure that it's full, it's pressurized correctly, and you're good. There's no activation required. Matt asked, what are the ADA requirements for emergency eye washes? And what you'll want to reference, or you can revisit us. We do an ADA webinar as well, and we're going to do one in December. I think December 8th, we'll be sending out information soon. I host that as well. You'll want the 2010 ADA standards, and you want chapter 6, sections 602.1 to 602.6. So these cover drinking fountains, but they also cover a lot of the just plumbing requirements in general. Emergency equipment also has to adhere to this, okay? There's just it's less likely that you're gonna run into a situation where you're in an environment that would require a combination unit that would be accessible. Unless you're like in a lab or a school, you have to have ADA equipment, and we have ADA equipment available. Tom asks, we are in a trailer repair shop. We have in the shop 2 eyewash safety shower combos. They are plumbed units but are not connected to any drain. Is there anything in the ANSI standards that would prohibit routing the water to a sewer drain? No, at all. You need to check your local requirements though, your local plumbing requirements, which will detail this for you. But if you're not putting anything nasty down the drain, then you're good. You would just have a concern if you were dealing with substances that obviously could not be introduced to the city sewage drain, right? So check those local codes. There's actually nothing that details information about drainage in the ANSI standard at all. Allison, I know this is more of a Cal OSHA question, but I'm in California, reading our standard on emergency shower eye wash stations referred to ANSI Z358.1 1981. Yeah, they do. For constructions, but for maintenance, they are requiring at least monthly checks. Do you know if there is a history with ANSI? And they used to recommend monthly checks, and Cal OSHA probably hasn't updated our maintenance inspections to weekly like ANSI's current recommendation is. I'm just surprised Cal OSHA is not following ANSI on this one. Agreed, Allison's nail, head, hammer. This is, it's surprising to us too. This is a rare instance where California is behind the curve, behind the pack on following these requirements. Cal OSHA definitely needs to update that date to say 2014. And I've tried myself, Allison, but for some reason they continue to reference the 1981 standard. And realistically, most of the state follows the 2014 standards anyways, right? Better to be ahead of the curve and provide equipment that is functioning correctly and providing proper first aid than not. Aldane, the role of emergency equipment when someone is on fire. I like this question so much, I gave it its own screen, its own slide. There's nothing defined, but if you're on fire, an emergency shower is an excellent option. The old school phrase is still applies, stop moving to keep from making the flames worse. Drop, roll, try to extinguish the fire. If you have an emergency shower nearby, yeah, hop in that thing and activate it. I don't see why not. You know, your coworker should be trying to douse the water with water anyways. So yeah, use that emergency shower. Michael, at what volume amount of chemicals are required to be in use or in storage to require a transition from Eyewash bottles to plumbed equipment? Any amount. You are not to use Eyewash bottles unless they are supplementing plumbed equipment. That's their only purpose, is to supplement primary equipment. So Eyewash bottles should not exist on their own anywhere. For ANSI documentation of annual Eyewash emergency shower volume inspections, do the records need to show more than date, inspector name, acceptable? Okay, nothing else needs to be referenced. Date, name on a checklist, usually a waterproof tag on the piece of equipment. Our model is SP170. They're usually zip tied to the equipment. That's all you need. It's just saying that this was inspected, but you don't need to document anything else, and save them for, you know, like a rolling 3 years or something. You don't need to keep them forever. Unless you want to, and you're an overachiever, and that's awesome. You can keep them forever. Beth, are there any written rules or guides or interpretations about requirements for Eyewash or showers for cannabis manufacturing? You are probably using fertilizer, cleaning agents, that type of stuff. It all comes down to referencing the SDS sheet for any of those substances. Check the first aid section. It's going to tell you whether you need an Eyewash or a shower, if you need to rinse your eyes, your body, and that will indicate whether you need that equipment available and what equipment you need available. David, any forthcoming updates to the standard to incorporate ADA? Nothing to incorporate it. The ADA is its own standard. It does apply to emergency equipment. Again, the 2010 ADA standards, chapter 6 for plumbing will cover that. And then Pedro, portable water requirements. I hope I covered that for you. But portable type equipment has to provide 15 minutes. They have to adhere to all the rules of plumbed equipment as far as height, the stream, testing it with an Eyewash gauge, and so on. But those are typically Eyewashes only. You won't typically find eye face washes or showers because that's a big tank to hold that type of water. Then Philip, how important is water temperature to effective use of Eyewash stations? Very effective. Keeps the user in the water primarily. What is the primary deciding factor on whether a portable or plumbed unit is needed? Just your situation. Do you have plumbed water in the area? Can you use it? Do you have enough plumbed water to supply a combination unit or shower? Those are the main things that you're looking for. And does it freeze? What kind of equipment do you use? And what kind of chemicals are you treating if people are exposed to them? Are smart systems available that detect activation, water flow, freeze risk, and send an alert? Yes, absolutely. So alarms are pretty common. We make a lot of different versions, ones that are just local, light and alarm, or that can be relayed to like a security office. So lots of those systems available. Not sure about one for freeze risk. If there is a freeze risk, the equipment has to be protected regardless, but nothing that I know of that particularly tests if it's going to freeze. And that's, you know what, that took a lot of time. I'm going way over. Any that were submitted in the control panel, any additional questions, I'm going to answer in full on an Excel spreadsheet and get those out after the fact so everybody can get their hands on them. Hayden's going to put a list of those together, and then I'll really take my time, answer those slowly and carefully, and get you guys a full list of the Q&A and everything that was asked, including the ones I just went over. So with that being said, we're going to close this. My name is Justin Dunn. I really greatly appreciate you attending this. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was useful. We had a huge number of attendees today, and we really greatly appreciate you being here, participating in the poll questions. If you need to reach out to us, please use my information. The Haas customer service number is on there. We have one of the best customer service teams in the whole of the US, I assure you. We also have a live chat feature on hosco.com, and you can chat directly with our customer service team there if you prefer that sort of interaction rather than a phone call. And then Hayden and I absolutely appreciate your attendance. Please use this information, go forward, share it, and reach out to us if you need anything else. Thank you again for attending today, and have a great week.
Thank you for attending, everyone. I apologize again if we did not get to your answer to your questions. Those answers will be provided in the follow-up email, like Justin said, as well as a copy of the slides.